So the Megillah in its historical context. Every book is written for an audience, right? Now, it could be that a book is written for audiences over the course of time, and so even its particular audience is not important. But I would say that the Megillah feels like a book that was written for a very particular audience, mainly because the Megillah is such a unique book. And we're going to get into what makes it very unique. But there is a sort of a theory of the Bible that was put forward by a very important rabbi whose name was Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman. Rabbi David Tzvi Hoffman's argument is that to understand what a book is really about, you have to understand it to its original audience. So when that comes to the Torah, the question is, what did the Torah mean for the people who stood at the foot of the mountain? And so here we have to figure out, what did the Megillah mean to the Jews in the days of Mordechai and Esther? So that means that in order to kind of understand the import of the text, we're going to have to at least deal with the historical context of it. Now, is the Megillah a children's story or an adult story? It feels like a children's story. It is verbose like a children's story. Rabbi, I think Yaakov Meidan likes to point out there are more words used to describe the preparation of the women for Achashverosh's harem than there are words in the first paragraph of Shema. Right? It's a little bit crazy how all of this works. And so there is something about this story which I would suggest is an adult story. But in order to get to that story, we have to peel back a couple of layers. And so first thing we're going to look at is the context. Now this particular painting, anybody recognize this painting?
No.
So this is just because we're, and I'll include myself, we're poor students of Tanakh. This is a scene from the book of Daniel. This is Belshazzar's feast, painted by Rembrandt van Rijn. But there's a reason I chose this particular picture, because the context, how does the Megillah begin? The Megillah begins with the feast of Achashverosh, the feast of this king. And it starts like a book of the Bible. It starts with the words Vayihi bimei Achashverosh, and it was in the day of Achashverosh, right? And then it tells, who Hamelech meHodu v'ad Kush. He was the king from India to Ethiopia. The story, though, is it begins with this big party that he has for 180 days. Very odd kind of thing to do, and I would argue also very expensive. So this sort of tells you that the story of the Megillah is going to involve politics, and it fronts like another book of Kings, but there's not a mention of the Jews for several chapters. And so the story of the Megillah is going to put us into a context which is unique, because it is not even a Jewish context. Now, this brings us to a couple of features of the book which are just different from either all or some parts of Tanakh. First of all, it is one of the few books that takes place entirely in the diaspora, right? So this book does not mention the Jewish people. It does not mention Jerusalem, except it does actually mention Jerusalem once, but it only mentions Jerusalem as the place where Mordechai was from. It does not tell us that Mordechai wants to go back to Jerusalem, which is sort of fascinating, because you would have thought that any good Jew wants to go back to Jerusalem. But here, we do not see anything like that in the Megillah, and it seems to be entirely rooted in this sort of diaspora place. And as again I mentioned, full picture of the diaspora, Jerusalem is virtually absent. The name of God is entirely absent from the Megillah, or at least so it would seem. And this is maybe the unkindest cut of all. Does anybody notice that Queen Esther is intermarried. She is married to the king. And I would even go so far as she seduces the king. Right? Esther is sleeping with a non-Jewish man. And the Talmud, is going to deal with this, and it's going to understand this. But please, let's just understand one thing about the story, right? It is not as if Esther turns around to Achashverosh and says, I've always wanted to be the president of the PTA of the Beit Yaakov of Shushan. So it's been nice, Achashverosh, but I want a get, right? You don't get divorced from the king's harem. These are jobs for life. You can't leave them. And so this is, it's got to be, Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun likes to say, he can't believe that the rabbis accepted this into Tanakh. He can't believe this was canonized. In the midst of a period of time when intermarriage was a real problem, we know this from the story of Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra is dealing with a very active problem of intermarriage in roughly a similar period of time. And so how can we stomach this? Right? This is I realize that everybody else here is on mute, but I'm hoping that you're similarly outraged. Now, Debbie writes because they were so assimilated. Yes, it's true, but why would I put it in a book and force everybody to read it twice? Right? So this is a question we're going to have to answer. Okay. Now, this is my attempt to give you a little bit of a window into the Jewish people and who they were at this particular moment. So, first of all, before I go any further, pause for image identification. So the image you're going to see right now on your left is actually a Megillah from Parma, Italy, in 1540. And I was very interesting. For those who were in the last class, the Megillot that we have today, the Ashkenazic Megillot, most Megillot written today, had the word Hamelech at the beginning of each column, and this one actually did not. I thought it was very interesting. But you're getting a view of the Italian version of writing a Megillah, and this is contemporary with a hero of the interpretation of the Megillah, which we'll get to rather shortly. But let's go back to our regularly scheduled program, which is the scheduled program of who these Jews were. So when we first learn about the Jews, we say, Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushan Abira. There was a Yehudi. So what do you think it means there was a Yehudi? How would you translate that word?
Weren't that many?
Go ahead, Anita. How would you translate it?
No, I was just saying it's as though there were not that many.
Oh, okay, maybe.
There was
but before that, no, but you're already interpreting. You're already second level interpretation. I just want you to translate the word Yehudi.
A praiser of God.
No, hold on. Anita, translate the word Yehudi.
Jewish.
Person of Judah, yeah.
Somebody from Judah.
Ah, okay.
From Yehuda.
Yes.
That's what I say. Yeah.
Yehuda is a geographic place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want you to know that I changed the Sefaria translation because I didn't like it. Because their translation is, in the fortress of Shushan lived a Jew by the name of Mordechai. Now, Jew is, of course, short for someone from Judah. And the reason that we are called Jews is because most of us, except for the Kohanim and the Levim, are all from Judah. But Judah outlived the rest of Israel. And it's the last stronghold, and it's ultimately conquered by Nebuchadnezzar, as we'll find out in a moment. But we find out that there was a man who was once from Judah. He lived in Shushan Abirah, Shushan the capital, maybe Shushan the fortress, whatever you want to call it. Ushmo Mordechai, and his name was Mordechai. Ben Yair, Ben Shim'i, Ben Kish, Ishimini. He was the son of Yair, who was the son of Shimi, who was himself the son of Kish, who was a man, a Ishimini, which means he was a Benjaminite. So that means that, along together with the people in Judah, there were people who were also in Benjamin. So this person, Mordechai, was also a Benjaminite. Now, see if I built my slides correctly. Find out in a moment. We said his name was Mordechai. Where does that name come from? You guys think, and like I did growing up, Mordechai is the Jewishest name ever. right?
No. It comes from Marduk, one of the idols of the
The
Persian
handsome guy you
Empire.
see here,
Yeah,
Marduk,
Marduk.
the highest god of the Mesopotamian pantheon, associated with the planet Jupiter. And he is depicted here with his pet dragon, right? So Marduk is it's it's a guy named Jupiter, Zeus. It's a guy named it's not named Chris, right? Mordechai's got the goyishest name ever, right? We read the Megillah, it doesn't hit us in the face. I can't emphasize this enough. Mordechai has a super goyish name, right? He has a superdy duperdy not Persian name. You could not have a more Persian name than Mordechai. So the other piece of this, the Talmud also gives us layers of who Mordechai was, because the Talmud is going to tell us also that Mordechai was one of the generals at the Battle of Thermopylae, and he and Haman had some history there. It's a fascinating sort of way of looking at it. But Mordechai is, he's, I want to think of a, he's as part of Persian society as I want to say who's the most Keir Starmer. I think Keir Starmer is Jewish, right?
His wife is.
No, his wife.
His wife.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought Keir Starmer was Jew. Okay. So let's Benjamin Disraeli.
Yes.
Okay. He's if Disraeli didn't actually become Christian, right? So he's in the upper echelons. He's a Janet Yellen kind of a person, right? Not that Janet Yellen has any spiritual thing to offer, but it just in terms of those people who occupy the positions of power and are also Jewish, but would not fully be totally distinguished as such, right? So at least as we first meet Mordechai, he is such, right? He is this. He is. We get his name as his name never changes from Mordechai. Oh, hold on. Okay, so that's Mordechai. Asher Hagla Yerushalayim, who was exiled from Jerusalem. So I'm in the second box now. This is the only reference to Jerusalem in the entire Megillah. And this reference to Jerusalem is a reference to the idea of Jerusalem destroyed. Right? So it's sort of fascinating that here in this book that is so much about Jewish survival, Jerusalem only exists as an extinguishing fire, right? As a glimmer in the rearview mirror. And so we learn about how Mordechai gets here. He gets here because Nebuchadnezzar forcibly transports all of the nobility from Jerusalem to the land of Israel. From Jerusalem to the land of Babylon. So Mordechai is amongst the transplantees, or at least his ancestors are amongst the transplantees from Jerusalem to Babylon. And of course, Babylon is then conquered by the Persians, and ipso facto, you've got a Mordechai in the middle of the Persian Empire. This sentence, by the way, is read when you read the Megillah. This is also read in the Eicha Trop, in the Lamentation Trops. Asher hagla Yerushalayim, imagola asher hagleta, im Yechonia melech Yehuda. So you read it so that you sort of feel the destruction of Jerusalem with it. Now, then we have this one other sentence here. We are told, and I cherry picked these. It says Vayhi omenet Hadassah, that he became the foster father to Hadassah, he Esther. Now here we have something also fascinating. And here we have Hadassah, who is also Esther, right? This is a guy named Andrew, whose Hebrew name is Hananiah. This is a guy named Scott, whose Hebrew name is Shlomo, right? So we learn, first of all, that she is a relative, she has no parents, and she's very beautiful, etc., etc. And he took her to be a daughter. Now, again, the name Esther is not a Jewish name.
Ashtoret, yeah.
Well, so Ashtoret, Ishtar, right? This is everybody meet Ishtar, goddess of war, love, sensuality, political power, and procreation, right? And Esther's going to tick off war, love, sensuality, political power, and then procreation, not so much. She's going to tick up almost all of the boxes of this person. But this is just absolute. I don't think we can really pierce the Megillah until we understand that Esther is a girl who she fronts as totally goyish, right? It's like her name is Chrissy. Just in our world, her name is Chrissy, right? Esther is a. I mean, it's not only not a Jewish name, it's a name of a foreign god. I mean, you could ask the question, are you even allowed to name your daughter Esther in the days of Esther and Mordechai? Right? Now, we have a little bit more insight into Esther because Esther, we're at least given this sense of she has a dual personality. Okay, so we've now gone a little bit more historical context.
May I say something?
Two things, same price.
Okay. It gives me the idea that because of Marduk and Ashtoret, and her having a Persian name and what do you call it here? A Hebrew name and a non-Hebrew name being Esther, and this gives me, and the intermarriage with the Hashverosh gives me the impression that this was very, very, very assimilated culture. The Jews were very assimilated into the Persian culture. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. And if I didn't say that clearly, I'm glad you did.
Thank you.
Picture that we are getting now is not of guys named, Velvel and Chezki, right?
Yeah.
These are not people who are living a separate life. These are highly integrated individuals with their society and their culture. And we'll see various statements of Chazal, the rabbis, who see part of the problem of the Jewish community here, and the reason the problems befall them is because they are very, very entrenched in Persian culture. What you're looking at right here is something called the Cyrus Scroll. There are several copies of this in the world. This one, I believe, is the one in the British Museum. I was zocha to see that not this past summer, but 2 summers ago, summer 2024. I went to see went to the British Museum. We got to see the Cyrus Scroll, and the Cyrus Scroll essentially is the scroll that decreed to the entire world that the Jews had the right to return to their homeland and rebuild their temple. Now, it took some time between the Cyrus the Great made this proclamation and the Jews actually did this. One of the great challenges of the Megillah is trying to figure out which one of the kings of Persia after Cyrus was actually the person who corresponds to King Achashverosh. This actually has a very significant impact on how you understand the story, but it's going to take us some time to figure that out. All right. There is a work of rabbinic literature of Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. This is accepted by almost every single religious thinker that you can think about, who basically understands that the chronology of things is this is how you get the 5786. Seder Olam Rabbah helps us understand the word 5786. And the Seder Olam Rabbah is going to give us a sense of how many kings there were in between these different events. And the Seder Olam Rabbah is going to tell us that Cyrus the Great is in 368 BC. It's the first of the Persian kings. And he's going to identify Achashverosh. I have a typo there. I think it's Cambyses is the name of the king. He's going to identify that with Cambyses. He's going to understand that there are only 4 Persian kings in between Cyrus the Great and Alexander the Great. And it's going to be the Persian period is going to be a period of 51 years. And that when we tell the story of the Jews in Shushan, we are telling the story of the Jews for whom Jerusalem has been destroyed and for whom the rebuilding of Jerusalem is waiting for some kind of event. They are before the rebuilding of Jerusalem. It's a very important piece of the picture. And so the Seder Olam Rabbah version of things, the vision of it, is going to be a vision of a time when the Jewish people are still, in a way, smarting, when they're still feeling the how do I want to put it, the challenges of this. Now, going all the way back, Belshazzar's feast. So the part of the story in the book of Daniel is that the Jews are culpable for partaking in Belshazzar's feast because Belshazzar is using the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash. This is also going to be understood as part of the Megillah because the Jews are, the Seder Olam Rabbah and the rabbinic opinions that support it are going to say, oh, you know what? The Jews also were partaking of the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash. And when you read the Megillah in the first chapter, let me just want to show you a way in which tradition references this idea. Okay. So if you see this word right here, it says v'kelim mikelim shonim v'yein machut rav kiyat hamelach. So when we read this, it says the royal wine was served in abundance as benefits the king. In golden beakers of varied design. So this word beakers of varied design, it means kelim is vessels of various design. When the reader reads this, he reads these words in the trup of Eicha. He reads them in the tune of the scroll of Lamentations. V'chelim michelim shonim, which is meant to be a reference to the fact that these were the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash. That Jews, how can you see them serving in the vessels of Beit HaMikdash and not be in a state of mourning, right? This is like Rahman al-Islam, God forbid, but to be in to go into some kind of Nazi setting and see that they're serving wine in the Kiddush cups to Nazi officers, right? It's jarring, the juxtaposition between the holy vessel and the unholy use. Okay, so this is the Seder Olam Rabbah. The problem with Seder Olam Rabbah is an individual whose name was Azariah Derasi. It's also named Azariah Min Ha'adumim. And he writes a book called Me'or Einaim. He is a Renaissance figure. And when I showed you before that Megillah from Parma, so this is where Azariah Derasi grew up. It's very possible that Azariah Derasi read that Megillah or perhaps heard that Megillah as the one he read from. But Azariah Derasi was a true Renaissance figure, and he realized that if you read the Greek sources, there are not 4 kings in the Greek line in that time period until Alexander the Great. There are really 10 kings. And so Azariah Derasi has a very different timeline here. So the Azariah Darassi's Persian period is 207 years, much longer. And and he understands that Darius the First, that's when the temple is being rebuilt, and the Achashverosh becomes Xerxes the First. Xerxes and Achashverosh sound a lot more similar than Cambyses and Achashverosh. And so I think there is Azariah Darassi took a lot of heat for this because he was going against a very, very well-established rabbinic text. Now, each one of them has their own virtue. I don't think you have to embrace one and throw out the other. But I would tell you that most of the Israeli scholars, today's Israeli scholars, let's say in Yeshivat Har Tzion and the Herzog, are fully embraced the chronology of Azariah Darassi. So you have, names that I've used before: Yoel Binun, Yonatan Grossman, Yaakov Meidan. They all assume Azariah Darassi is correct. Anna, you have your hand raised. No? Nothing?
Sorry. I was thinking about all the par'o in the Torah. That there were several par'os, one after the other, the first, the second, the third, and fourth, and they also had other names. So is it not possible they had Achashverosh number 1, number 2, and so on, and then they had another name as well, as what Rossi is saying here?
I mean, that's certainly possible. It's certainly possible they had another name, right? But those pharaohs, there's Pharaoh Necho, Pharaoh Shishak. So Pharaoh was king this, king that. So there's also there are parts of the Megillah. There's something called Korean Ketiv. So the Korean Ketiv means that the way the word is spelled and the way the word is read are a little bit different. There are a couple times in the Megillah where Achashverosh is written Chet Reish Shin or something like that, which is a lot closer to Xerxes.
Different spelling, I see.
Right? So, Achashverosh is a bit of a Hebraicized version, right? Like, Oslo is really pronounced Ushlu, and Florence is really Firenze, and Leghorn is really Livorno. So I'm just using some English equivalents. I'm sure there are thousands of others that I think Moscow is Moskva or something. I'm sure there's a Russian speaker here who can tell me that Moscow is not Moscow.
It's Moskva for sure, Moskva.
It's Moskva. Right. So, English people just can't pronounce certain things, so we just butcher the names, right? So Hebrew people couldn't pronounce, Chishresh. So they called him Achashverosh, right? But you can see that that name recommends it even more strong.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. Now, okay. One of the things to sort of appreciate in the Megillah, in just giving you a couple of the arguments behind each of these readings, and then what really I want to try and understand is a little bit what's happening in the context of the Megillah. So one of the reasons that Seder Olam Rabbah thinks there are only 4 kings is because he's interpreting the book of Daniel. Now, the book of Daniel is loosely contemporary with the Megillah. It also takes place in the Babylonian context. It's slightly earlier because Daniel is brought into the court of Nebuchadnezzar, of Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar is sort of generations before before the Persian Revolution, or right before Cyrus takes over from the Persians. But it tells us, right, and I will tell you the truth, behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the first shall be richer than them all, and his strength through his riches he will stir up against the realm of Greece. So this is assumed to be, the Greek king in this is assumed to be Alexander the Great. So they assume you have 3 Greek kings, and then you have Alexander the Great. Okay, all good. And so that's how Seder Olam Rabbah reads it. What verse are you going to pull up to say that maybe Seder Olam Rabbah is wrong? Well, but you, Daniel, keep these words secret and seal the book until the time of the end. Many will range far and wide, and knowledge will increase. So maybe the book of Daniel is meant to obscure some of these facts as well. And so when maybe it means 3, it doesn't really mean 3. And so you have to interpret things a little bit differently. Daniel, though, is a very, very good place to sort of see the comparison between these two. What I'm trying to show here is that we have 2 different versions of the story. One version of the story is going to have the Jews who do not have their own homeland, and they are fully members of an exile without a current hope of their temple. The other, the Azariah de Rossi version, has the Jews in a very different place. They have already reestablished a place to live in Israel. Okay, so if you will, the version of Seder Olam Rabbah is the Jewish community of 1880, and the chronology of Azariah de Rossi is the Jewish community of 1960. Right? 2 very different places, right? Or I would say maybe even Azariah de Rossi is the Jewish community of 1973. Or, no, let's go a little before the Yom Kippur War, 1970. Right? So Azariah de Rossi is Jewish community of 1970, right? Jerusalem reunited, right? Very, very optimistic. And Seder Olam Rabbah is Jerusalem of 1880, right? We are fully diaspora community. Maybe there are a few Meshuggahs who are talking about Zionism, but it's not really taken the entire world by storm. The book of Daniel is a very good comparison point for the Megillah, because the book of Daniel, you have very overt religiosity, very overt faith in God. Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel have conversations about God. Daniel is interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. Daniel will refuse to eat the food of the palace, right? He's coming in and saying, whose hashgacha is under? I can't eat this. And he's respected for it. It works out well for him. Right? And this is very different than a group of Jews who are drinking from the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash and pretending that this is just another cup. The Megillah also, there is not a single prayer uttered in the Megillah. The name of God is not uttered by, and it's not that the name of God is not in the Megillah because just the king and all sorts of other things, right? Because we don't want to talk about God and miracles. But you would think that maybe Esther would say, I have to go confront the king and my head could get cut off tomorrow, right? And she's gonna say, I'm gonna say Shema maybe tonight. I'm gonna call out to God, right? But the name of God is not even mentioned. The activity of prayer is not mentioned. Now it's very artful in Megillah, right? Let's hear. I'm gonna just take you to that particular verse because I think it's worth seeing. Okay. Okay. So here Esther says, Lech kenoset kol hayudim. Go and gather all the Jews together who are in Shushan, v'tsumu alai, and fast for me. V'al tochlu v'al tishtu shloshet yamim. Do not drink, do not eat for 3 days. Laila vayom, night and day. V'ani v'anorota atzum came, and me and my um my my maid servants, I guess, the women, my ladies in waiting. I'm not sure what the correct terms of court women are, but my ladies in waiting are going to do the same. Now, it clearly it has a reference to fast, to prayer, right? We imagine in our minds, right? We like the way we think of this is, oh, this is a fast day. Yeah, I'm sure they got together in shul and they read Tehillim, right? But it doesn't say that, right? It doesn't say that they said a word of prayer, just as they fasted. Now, who are you fasting for, right? Because you need to look skinny? Like, I don't think that's what was going on here, right? Clearly, it's an act of prayer, but it doesn't say the prayer. I want to just show you one other thing, which is just interesting, and I discovered this by accident. I discovered this by accident because I got a new. It's called a tikkun, which is the book that you use to prepare to read the Megillah. And here it goes. Okay, and it has this sort of it had these little indications. I couldn't figure what they were, and then I saw in the back it explained all of these interesting indications. So let me just show you this. Okay. So it is this sentence. It's sentence 4, and the English is this: "If it please your Majesty," Esther replied, "let your Majesty and Haman come today to the feast that I've prepared for him." Right? So Esther's coming to this feast. She's got this very, this is the big challenge. She's challenged, and she's right in front of she's going to be right in front of the king and the enemy all together. So here, it says, look at the letters that are.
Yud Hey Vav Hey. Yeah.
There you go. Right? How do you like that? Hashem's name, right? Vatomer Esther Imel Melech Tov. If it's good for the king, Hashem, come to the party, right? I don't know if that's pshat. I can't say. But boy, isn't that interesting? You gotta love that.
Wow.
Hashem's name right there. Okay, so I'm not a big gimmicky kind of guy, but I thought that was interesting, and I'll show you why I think that there might be some good reason to choose that particular kind of interpretation, because the Megillah is a book that draws heavy reference from other parts of Tanakh. So here, this is I titled this slide "Refusals." So the first refusal you're going to see is Mrs. Potiphar. Mrs. Potiphar, it says, "Vayihi kidabra el Yosef yom yom v'lo shama eleha." She was trying to get into Joseph's pants every day, and that's what it means. And she talked to him every day. Every day, she would make some weird off-color suggestion. She would, she was Ghislaine Maxwell, right? She was a sexual abuser, right? And so she was seducing Joseph day in, day out, right? Lishkav etzla liot ima, right? So that he would lie beside her, he would sleep with her. This is a pure sexual reference. And what happens if Joseph sleeps with Mrs. Potiphar?
Well, he doesn't.
Just work with me for a second here. What happens if he does?
Oh, he'll be dead.
Exactly. He's going to have his head chopped.
Okay, that's certainly one outcome.
And
right?
some other parts too.
But let's say Mrs. Potiphar figures out a way to kill Mr. Potiphar, because she likes this young, beautiful guy. She figures out a way. Maybe she's really the power behind the throne, right? So then Joseph becomes married to Mrs. Potiphar, and what do you know? He's just another member of the Egyptian nobility. And then there's no Joseph, right? So here, this is a parallel to the story of Haman and Mordechai. You see that
Wow.
you see the linguistic parallels. Vayihi be'omram elav yom vayom velo shama aleihem. They told Mordechai every day, bow down to Haman. But Mordechai would not listen to them. Right? Vayigidu Haman, they told us to Haman, Lirod hayamdu divrei Mordechai. Would Mordechai's word withstand? Yidlahem shir Yehudi, because they told him that Mordechai was a Yehudi. What you see here is there is an open question in the Megillah, which is, why does Mordechai not bow down to Haman? And the rabbis answer this very simply. They say, okay, well, you know what? Haman had an idol around his neck and Mordechai wouldn't bow down to it. But it's not in the Megillah. And so there are modern readers of the Megillah who look at the Megillah as an internal reference to other books of Tanakh. And so when you look at this word formation does not appear in other places. It is really very much the presentation of Joseph and Mrs. Potiphar. And here, the idea is that Haman is going to represent the subjugation of the Jewish people, the erasure of the Jewish people. His power is the invitation to conform to a different power structure, to conform to. There is a thought again, and you have to connect a lot of dots here. And the idea is that the Megillah, especially if you consider the Megillah is in a political context that is very different than one you imagined before. Let's just imagine that the Megillah is in the Azariah de Rossi scenario. They are trying to rebuild the temple. There is an episode in the book of Ezra Nehemiah where there is a scandal, an accusation placed against the Jewish people, and it's written back to the Persian high command that they should put an end to the construction of the Beit HaMikdash. According to the Talmud, this is the son of Haman. And here, Mordechai is saying, I'm not letting these guys win. I'm not going to let them win. I'm not going to let them win and not allow us to rebuild Jerusalem. And so the Megillah paints in the most subtle strokes. And if you do not know the entire Tanakh by heart, you cannot really pierce the Megillah. Because you see, I've read the Megillah for, let's give me 10 years. It's now been, 40 years of reading Megillah, 41 years of reading Megillah. I'd never seen this before. Right? Fascinating.
So I have a question.
Yes, Aaron.
So for some reason, it sticks in my mind that we've always learned that Mordecai was not only sitting at the gate, he was sitting at the gate because he was someone who was, in fact, part of the local Sanhedrin.
Correct.
One of the judges. And he's not bowing down to Haman as you bring in here, because Haman would have had an amulet of a local god around his neck. But we've just explored the situation where they were so integrated and so assimilated into the world of Ahasuerus and Babylon, Persia, sorry, that they had virtually lost their identity, taking.
I'm so glad you asked that
local
question.
Names and the rest of it.
I'm so glad you asked that question. Okay, I could make the argument that the single most penetrating cultural event of the entire year is the Super Bowl, and I can make the argument that a Jew who does not look any particularly Jewish, whose name is Robert Kraft, is the owner of one of the most storied franchises of the NFL. And
what's the Super Bowl?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, and he's Robert Kraft is a big Zionist, right? And Robert Kraft is not going to have any piece of ceasefire now, or anti-Semitism. He sponsored this big ad to prevent anti-Semitism, and you could decide whether it's a good ad or a bad ad. I don't care. But the point is that Robert Kraft he is culturally indistinguishable from Roger Goodell or other owners of the NFL, who I can't even name. Right? He's friends with Donald Trump. Right? This is a man who is in the echelons of power, but he's still. You ask Robert Kraft, does he care about what happens in Jerusalem? Right? You bet your cleats he does. So this Mordechai here is saying, no, I'm not going to do that. Now, the Seder Olam Rabbah has a version of it. The Seder Olam Rabbah puts Mordechai living much earlier, and so he's a member of the Sanhedrin, all that stuff, very good. And there's a reason to embrace the Seder Olam Rabbah version of things. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I think there is a version of the Megillah where things are literally written in code. They're written in code because you're in a Persian Empire. You can't write them any other way. And it is a story about the attempt to survive. Now, I have not dropped the real hammer here, because the real hammer here I'm going to have to bring in another episode, and maybe next episode will be the real hammer. Yobi Nun has a fascinating read on this whole thing that will help you understand not only the Megillah, but also your own life. You might end up having to move to Israel afterwards, but I'll give that warning. Okay.
You would make my wife very happy.
Okay, Ruthie Pinto, your next question, and Annie.
Yeah, I still don't see so much the connection with Eshet Potifar, because in the Sipur there where you wrote Haman, then obviously they want to annihilate the Jewish people. Was that the ulterior motive of Eshet Potifar, or it was just she wanted to get Yosef because he was good looking?
Okay,
That's was always my understanding.
I'm going to boil down a little more simply. Let's just assume man marries non-Jewish woman. That is a recipe for assimilation. His family disappears to be Jewish at that point. Now let's make that assumption. Let's make that assumption that if Joseph succumbs to Mrs. Potiphar, that's the end of his Jewishness.
Or you met Zipporah, the daughter of the Kohen Midian.
No, that's Moshe. That's Moshe.
Moshe. But he also married somebody from Egypt. He's not Jewish, Osnat, or whatever her name is.
Okay, we can deal with Osnat differently. Okay, but the point is, Osnat is on his terms, not hers. Right? I think we could, you could for sure argue this differently, but I think that I'm not going out on such a huge limb saying that Mrs. Potiphar, the seduction of Joseph has to resist Mrs. Potiphar. If Joseph does not resist Mrs. Potiphar, he stops being Joseph. He's not Joseph the Tzaddik, right? Let's just assume that, right? Now,
I'd like to go further.
Hold on. Just let me just make this point, and then the way in which these two sentences are almost identically structured, right? The idea of speaking to every day, right? And he did not listen. This is, to me, an unmistakable literary allusion. And so we're meant to then read the story of Mordechai versus Haman as we would read the story of Joseph versus Mrs. Potiphar. That's what the reader is being invited to do. Now, at that point, after that, if you want to read a little different version of why he has to resist Mrs. Potiphar is kissing Haman's tuchus, so to speak, a problem for the Jews, because once we become sycophants and we never stand up for ourselves, we're finished. You could have a lot of different interpretations. I'll give you that, but I think you are asked to then interpret this moment. So I don't know if that satisfies you, Ruthie, but that's what I have to offer. Annie, you had a question.
Yes, it occurred to me that perhaps Yosef was the only one who did not succumb to sexual invitation by women. David succumbed, Shimshon succumbed, the son of Reuven Shimon, the son of Yaakov, slept with his concubine, and I think this guy, Yosef, might be the only person who did not succumb. Now, there is a reason why he did not succumb. You were always looking for the hand of God. If Joseph would have succumbed, there would have been no Goshen. The Jewish people would have stayed. The Israelites would have stayed in Mitzrayim. There was no Moshe Rabbeinu. The whole story, the whole plot would have been. There was no plot.
Beautiful, right? Okay. So you're saying that. Okay, very good, right? That you're saying that this statement says Joseph resists because he sees the hand of God, and somehow in the story of Haman already, this is before Haman is attacking the Jews. Mordechai sees the perfidy, the nefarious nature of Haman. Very good.
Mm-hmm. I think Yosef was the only man who never succumbed to a woman's temptation in the history of the Tanakh. Really.
Okay, fair enough. I don't disagree. But okay, so all right. So this is the first installment, and just to sort of wrap up where we are, what we've seen in the first installment is that Mordechai and Esther live in an intensely non-Jewish context. That this is the diaspora. The assimilation is profound, and that the book is written with a lot of cryptic messages where we have to work very hard to find God, right? We can, but you have to work hard for it, and so the scroll itself is very masked. What we're in our next installment, we're going to sort of understand how this unfolds in particular, because again, this is a very difficult book to figure out how it made it into Tanakh. This is a book where the heroine marries the non-Jew, right? So we have work to do here, and so we'll that's our mission for next Monday night. All right.
Excellent. יוצא מן הכלל. וואו.
תודה.
תודה רבה.
תודה.
Okay, everyone.